will introduce our keynote speaker today. I'm very excited for us to introduce him. His name is Mr. Sundeep Raichura. He is the CEO of Zamara Group, and Zamara Group is based out of Kenya, where they help individuals and businesses, and it's all about making the right decisions and providing the solutions financially, which will determine your future financial success. And so with that, I really appreciate you, Mr. Raichura, for coming in today. And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing at Zamara, and then you can carry on with your keynote speech.
Hi, good afternoon. So should I say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world and in the African continent. Let me first of all say how very delighted and honored I am to have been invited to present at this first ever Africa Wealth Conference. So thank you very much, Anne and team. Really excited to be here, especially delighted because, you know, the subject of creating wealth or wealth is one that, you know, a lot of us are very shy about talking about in Africa. We're almost apologetic talking about wealth. You know, it's like, you know, we want to live on handouts. We don't want to talk about wealth creation because it can have other connotations on our continent. So I'm really happy that we're having this initiative, and I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm not able to share my screen because you need to enable me to share my presentation, if that's okay, Anne.
Okay, sure. We're going to go ahead and have Regina do that. She will let you share your screen.
Okay, so super. So as Regina does that, let me just say a little bit about myself. By profession, I'm an actuary. So I love doing all numbers to 15 decimal places. And I could almost do this presentation using a formula, but Anne has told me that I must speak in English and I must not confuse anybody. So I've been in, you know, I was born in Kenya, brought up here, spent many years abroad. But having said that, I've been back for 25 years now and completed 25 years with Zamara last August. As Zamara, we are a specialist financial services organization. We offer pensions, medical, and insurance solutions in Africa. We have a presence in 6 countries and a Pan-African ambition. We are also the largest actuarial service provider in this part of the world. I hope, Anne, I can now share my screen.
Go ahead and press the share screen button.
I can do it. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we do see
yes,
your
we
screen.
can.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So, and the subject of this talk is creating wealth. And what I thought about talking about is the importance of financial planning as part of wealth creation. Because this is a step that I feel very, very many of us overlook when we are thinking about wealth creation. As I said earlier, being an actuary, I could spend the next 30 minutes going through the derivation of this formula, but then I'd send a lot of you to sleep. So there will be no formula in my presentation, but lots of pictures. So what do we mean by wealth? So wealth is very much in the eye of the beholder, means different things to different people. And sadly, money is the sole measure of wealth that we think about today. We don't talk about integrity, how we respect each other, how we respect others when we talk about wealth. And most people, when we talk in terms of wealth, is, you know, what is our money? How much money do we have? What do we own? And in Kenya and Africa, you know, we have a lot of attachment to things like land and property. Our wealth is broadly defined as what we own, less what we owe to other people. And so, as I said, I mean, you know, it's important. It's good to ask ourselves, what does being wealthy mean? And I believe I have sufficient gray hair to say that there's a very important difference between being wealthy and well-being. And it's when we talk about being wealthy or well-being, it's very important to look at the different parts of wealth or well-being. There's the physical side in terms of our fitness, are we eating well? Are we making sure that, we're staying healthy? The other one is, obviously the mental side of well-being. Again, how are we managing stress and dealing with the daily pressures of life? And then obviously financial well-being, which is all about investment planning, understanding what we can invest in, estate planning, and what the different options for us are. So what I want to say is that well-being is much, much broader. We normally tend to think of well-being purely in terms of financial terms, but it's important in our lives to pay attention to all the different parts of well-being. So financial well-being to me is not just about the money, but it's meeting about the goals for our life and ensuring that we achieve long-term financial security for ourselves and our families. But since the subject of today is money, let's go to the money side of it. So for this presentation, I'll talk about financial planning from a money point of view. And from the statistics that we see, less than 1% of us in Africa can deem ourselves to be wealthy from a financial point of view, and less than 5% can deem ourselves to be comfortable in our current status or in our future financial well-being. And therefore, in order to achieve financial well-being, we need to plan. We need to identify the opportunities that we have, acquire the right knowledge and the skills, and prepare ourselves. And these are some of the things that I will be talking about in the course of my presentation. And an important question that we must ask ourselves is, what do I want and how do I get there? Okay? And so financial planning is very much having a targeted approach, right? Rather than having a scattergun approach, being ad hoc about it. It means being very, very deliberate in terms of achieving financial well-being and creating wealth in our lives. The last thing we want is that we think we're on track and we just fall off the conveyor belt or the flyover. So a question that I often ask is, why should we save? Why should we save and get away from this instant gratification that we have? Because let's face it, in Africa, we are very much a consumption society. If you look at the level of savings here and compare it to, say the Far Eastern countries, I mean, we're not doing very well. So we need to ask ourselves, why should we save? How much should we save? And how should we invest? So clearly, there are so many priorities that we may have for saving. It could be educating our children. It could be saving for emergencies. It could be for buying a home. It could be for buying the latest gadgets or the latest car, or ensuring that we're credit worthy. Or an area that people often ignore is retiring comfortably. Indeed, I say that other than one's home, the most important reason why we should be accumulating wealth is so that we can have enough to sustain ourselves when we are no longer able to work because of old age or ill health or disability. So being able to retire wealth is a very, very important part of why we need to have that wealth. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we saving for? What are our objectives for wealth creation? Is it a holiday for our family? Is it leaving money is it leaving behind a good inheritance? Is it having a good retirement? Are we looking at preserving our capital, maximizing returns from our investments, or is it just to have a game of golf, right? Be very, very clear on what are our objectives and recognize that our needs will be very different based on where we are in our life cycle. If we are young and single, probably, educating ourselves, thinking about our first home. Debt is a thing that very many young people that I see really fall into. In fact, so many people are drowning into the debt trap. And with the mushrooming of online money lending that we see in Kenya and indeed many other parts of Africa, many people find themselves heavily in debt, and also a lot of peer pressure putting people under a lot of unnecessary debt. So it's very important to distinguish between what is good debt and what is bad debt. Yes, there are certain types of debt. For example, taking out a mortgage for a home, that might be a good idea, or taking out debt to educate oneself or achieve something that is investment worthy, may be good things to do, but avoid falling into a debt trap. And as we become older in our lives, when we have a family, when we have kids, things like education, things like ensuring that we have sufficient medical cover, savings for ourselves, having a home. As we become older, some of us go through a midlife crisis. But again, these are things that, again, become very important, especially as our children grow. And we need to then start thinking about our future. How are we going to sustain ourselves when we're no longer able to work? And depending on where we are in our lives, our needs will be different. And therefore, our financial planning needs to take each of those circumstances into account. So when we look at financial planning, we should be asking ourselves, where and what stage am I in my life? Am I young and single? Am I in my midlife? Am I approaching retirement? What is my current financial status? What do I need? What do I desire to have? And it's always good to be ambitious in our desires. And how much am I short in terms of where I want to be, what I need compared to what I currently have? And what is it that I can do about it? And in doing this, and this needs to be a very systematic exercise where we look at our personal circumstances, as I said earlier, what do we currently have, including whether you have your home, what other savings do we have, when do we want to retire, for example, where do we work now, what is our current standard of living, what standard of living do we desire, what can we afford? And in order to be able to start asking how much extra can I put aside to create wealth. And I use the word saving and investing interchangeably, because saving sometimes has a negative connotation. Saving for old age doesn't resonate with people, but investing for your future is something that resonates with a lot of people. And we need to ask, what are we investing for? But how do we do this? And I believe my wife may well be attending this, but one thing she hates it when I say is having a budget, right? Because I believe that a key part of financial planning is having a budget so that you can become the finance director for your life, so that you can control your money and it's not your money controlling you. And you can manage your expenses a bit better and identify possible savings. Because before you're budgeted, if you haven't budgeted, you would not be asking yourself the questions. Is it necessary? Can I do without it? If not, where can I spend? Or where can I reduce my spending? Okay, so sometimes say people can be divided into three classes: the haves, the have-nots, and the have not paid for what they have. And I keep on stressing this, especially to young people. I believe, and you should have asked, what is the profile of people in terms of, other than being the country where they are, how old they are, because we should really not try to keep up with others. We should not spend unless we have it, avoid the debt trap, and never use our homes or cars or possessions as security for debt, because that's what a lot of people end up doing. So the next step is, having prepared a budget, we should then be able to identify how much can we save or invest. And this saving could be saving for our future, saving for our kids, saving for keeping a cash fund for emergencies, and might make sense to pay off any debt that is not essential, that is not useful debt, and ensuring that we can provide for our needs and the needs for our families. And finally, need to choose the right saving vehicle and ensure that we have the right strategy. So not to make financial decisions in isolation, consult with accredited financial advisors. And I always say, don't fall prey to poor financial advice. Make sure you take the advice. This is very important, but make sure we get the right advice, and ensuring that we plan regularly and monitor regularly so that we can stay on track. So analyzing our personal situation is very, very critical in terms of how much do we have on currently, what is our time horizon, what are we looking to invest for, what is our current income needs, what are our income requirements in the future likely to be, what are our current and future expenses, what liabilities do we have. Tax is a very important part of financial planning, and how much risk we are able to bear or not bear is also very crucial. And this can vary from person to person and what stage we are in our lives. So again, just to repeat, we need to evaluate our own standards, set proper goals for saving for our children, for our pension, prioritize those goals, and very important, distinguish between necessity and want. Now, just want to talk about some of the risks in wealth creation. And one of the worst enemies for anybody looking to invest is inflation. For those of us who were around in the 1970s, I'm sure you'll agree with me that you could buy a car with 5,000 Kenya shillings, and this is $50 for those from the rest of the continent. In 1980, we could probably buy a motorbike. In the year 1990, maybe a bicycle. By the year 2000, a pair of shoes, and now we're lucky to buy a pair of socks with 5,000 shillings or $50. So inflation is very, very key, and inflation can have a very severe impact on our investments. And again, how we structure our investments can determine whether those investments will keep pace with inflation, i.e., whether those investments will give us a real return, i.e., a return that keeps pace with inflation, or that the purchasing power of our money or our wealth is being eroded by inflation. A lot of us want to consume more than we can afford. And yes, we want to do all these nice trips and have these nice holidays. That would be great. But we always must check, are we able to afford these things? Now, again, very important, and some of these slides are referring to retirement rather than just wealth creation for wealth creation. But we often say when we're talking about planning for one's future pension is that what you have put in should be only about 25 cents of your final pot of money. Your return should contribute between 2/3 to 3/4 of what we have eventually in our nest egg for our future. And that's why the investment strategy is very, very important in terms of making sure that we can achieve this, so that our money is working the hardest for us. What we have put in, the return that we get on this money is working. We have invested the money well to earn us a decent return. Now, the other thing that is also very important, and most of us don't think about this, is that we are living longer. Whether we believe it or not, to a lot of the people that I speak on to the African continent, when we talk about saving for the future, especially saving for old age, people say, well, with life expectancy at 55 or 60, we're not even going to get there. So why do we need to worry about this? And I say those are distorted statistics. Life expectancy of 60 in Africa is actually life expectancy at birth, which is very heavily impacted by things like infant mortality and things like AIDS, HIV, the accident mortality between our 20s and 30s. But after 35, let's not cheat ourselves. Life expectancy here is as long as it is in the rest of the world. I'm planning on living to 100, and I want to say that everyone should be thinking about how will we have enough wealth to sustain ourselves when we can no longer work in old age. And the other thing is advances in medical science are really extending our lifetimes. And unless we have sufficient wealth for our future, that could be a very miserable time for us. And the other thing that I keep on talking about is medical care, right? Because let's face it, in Africa, very, very few countries offer medical care. A lot of us, whilst we are employed, we have the benefit of medical cover whilst working, but that falls off when we are no longer able to work. And almost 60% of what we are likely to spend on our medical is likely to happen after in our old age. And therefore, thinking about having a pot of money to pay for our medical bills in the future is also very, very critical. And the other thing that I also see is people investing their money too conservatively. So most people will probably keep their money in cash or under the mattresses because we don't trust the financial system. So this is a common strategy. A lot of the people, even if when they are invested, when there is market volatility, like what we saw last year, what we saw in 2008, 2011, for example, we tend to switch into cash. And what happens here is that we lock in low returns, we miss the boat, and when we switch, we actually switch, we buy assets at much higher prices. So again, a conservative investment strategy is often a disjointed investment strategy, and it's very important to take care. So unless you're older, where you need more income, where you need to ensure that there is more security in your assets, in your investments, I would guard against a conservative strategy, because actually it can be more risky. And the same goes for people being too aggressive in their investments. And this happens a lot. And we see this a lot in Kenya. People really go for aggressive, people go into speculation, people invest in plots of land, hoping that they can double in prices. Be very, very careful about doing this. And therefore, it's always good to appreciate where we are in our life stage and have an investment strategy that takes account. So when we are younger, we can afford to take more risk. As we become older, we need to move to a more conservative investment strategy. And this should be done in a structured and a proper manner. Now, having talked about the importance of a financial plan and investment strategy, and some of the risks in investment, and again, in a presentation like this, within 30 minutes, we can only skim through some of these things. Let me also talk about investment options. And again, there's a huge variety of options that we can have for saving. You can invest in. You can put your money in cash. You can invest in stocks and shares. You can invest in property, in unit trusts. You can take out policies. You can invest offshore as well for those countries that allow investing offshore. So again, very important to say that there's a variety of options. We all know about the importance of diversifying our investments, not putting all our eggs into one basket, and being careful about the risks we take based on where we are. I've talked earlier about cash offering us a predictable return. Yes, cash gives us that liquidity, having access to the money when we need it, but cash is one of the worst investments when we look at inflation. Okay, so because it loses its real value over the long term. So yes, cash gives us the short-term security, but if we're looking to invest for the medium to long term, we need to ensure that we are investing in a more diversified portfolio. Stocks and shares, investing in the capital markets are good things for the long-term investor. But again, we need to ask, should we manage this portfolio ourselves? Should we get somebody else to manage it? And recognize that a decent amount is needed if we are to run a successful portfolio. Always remember that investing directly in stocks and shares can be risky. We need to have a long-term time horizon. We need to understand what our objectives are. Very important to understand the tax implications and look at, how are we managing these assets? And recognize that investment returns can be volatile, can fluctuate, can go up and down. We can have a bumpy ride. We can have turbulence in the short term. But as long as we have the right investment strategy for the future, these things will balance out. Okay, so I'm just giving you a couple of examples. So unit trusts, again, in Kenya, in very many other parts of Africa, we now have many unit trusts structures. These are collective investment schemes. Now, what these do is they avoid the risk of investing in one stock, in one bond. So we can diversify our holdings by having a specialist investment manager manage our money for us. But again, all the time when choosing a unit trust, it's the same things again. What's our risk profile? How long do we want to invest our money for? How does this fit into our overall investment strategy? And make sure that we invest with recognized investment houses who have a good investment philosophy, who have the people and the resources and the controls that are important. And as I said earlier, always consider what are the tax implications and take advice. And always distinguish between speculating and investing. What you want for your future financial security, you don't want to speculate on. Okay. The other thing that a lot of us overlook is protection, right? And ask the question, what would happen if, God forbid, we were to pass away at a young age, or we were to pass away and have family, or who are dependent on us, we become disabled. Do we have enough life cover should something happen to us? Do we have enough protection should we become disabled? Do we have enough to cover expenses? For example, last year we had the COVID-19 situation. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people did not have any savings. So I always say, at least try and have a kitty that can help you keep you going for 3 months to 6 months to cover your expenses. And health is a very important thing. Unless you have proper insurance cover, a lot of people's financial planning goes completely haywire because of a sudden health emergency that they need to cover, or even for their family. So always important to ensure that we have adequate self and family protection by taking out the appropriate insurance covers. A lot of us don't think about insurance, but recognize the unexpected can happen, will happen. We cannot afford to be underprepared when that happens. Another important point I want to talk about is estate planning. I talked earlier about ensuring that we have sufficient life cover, but also ensuring that should something happen to us, how will our assets be looked after? Have we given thought to this? And for many of us in Kenya and indeed in Africa, sometimes we say that when we plan for these things, we are inviting the inevitable. But we should put aside those old taboos and traditions and ask the question, what will happen to our family or our dependents should something happen to us? And therefore ensuring that we have a proper plan, ensuring that we have a proper will in place, that so that our assets can be well looked after by somebody who is trusted to look after. So there's somebody that you can trust to look after your financial affairs should something happen to you. And we hear so many stories of people, in spite of being wealthy, and you see it in the papers all the time if you're in Kenya, that a wealthy person, the family is struggling because there was no proper estate planning done. Now, I want to talk about give some rules of thumb for you. So these are rules for long-term saving. So firstly, don't confuse long-term saving with short-term saving. Long-term saving should be about wealth creation, typically planning for your future retirement, owning your home. Short-term saving is for emergencies that you might have. Always ask the question, where does my money go? And for most of us, 10 to 15% of our wealth, of our income probably goes missing every month. So lock some in the vault before it goes. Increase your long-term saving and pay off short-term debt, especially unnecessary debt. And remember the budget that I talked about earlier. So the second rule of long-term saving is pay yourself, put some money aside. And if we can put between 15 to 20% of our monthly salary or income, that would be a great thing to do towards wealth building. The third rule of long-term saving is harness the power of compound saving. Albert Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Right? As I said, let the money work for you the best. By the time you want to access your money, whether it's an old age or whether when it's using for something, when you need to use it for something, make sure that you've invested in a way that the bulk of your money is actually being the return on your money working for itself. The fourth rule of long-term saving is try not to break into the world. Preserve your wealth. Use it for the purposes that you intended it to be used. Always look at these trade-offs in life, that if you spend on this, if you spend on instant gratification, what will it mean in terms of impacting your future financial well-being? There's something in finance called the rule of 72, which is good to know, that if you divide 72 by the return that you're likely to earn, it tells you the number of years it will take to double your money. So for example, if you're earning a return of 9% on your money, you want to know how long will it take me to double my money, you just say 72 divided by 9, you will double your money in 8 years. And you can use this rule in reverse to say that if I have 250,000 shillings now, or $250,000, and I want to double it in 5 years, what sort of return do I need? Again, say 72 divided by 5, 14.4%. And what this says is if you want to double your money in 5 years, you need to earn a return of 14.4% on your money. Again, the rule of 72 helps you to understand the impact of inflation. So let's say inflation is 5.5%. In 13 years' time, your money will have halved. If you in terms of the what you can purchase, the purchasing power of your money will have halved. Okay, very important. A lot of people don't know what they have. So always ask yourself, what do I have? If I'm working, do I enjoy any employment benefits in terms of life covers, disability covers? Do I participate in a pension plan from my employer? What other benefits do I get? What are my personal investments, especially if I have children? What insurance policies do I have? Do I keep track of each of these, all my investments, all my plans, all the plots of land that I might own, everything that I might have held before that I might have forgotten about? When was the last time that I reviewed these against my needs? So very important as part of financial planning, take a spot check. Make sure that you have a list of everything that you own. And I could actually share with you a template that you could use, and that you could share, that shows you, how you can plan your finances well. Again, based on where you are in your life cycle, just to recap, if you're young and unmarried, what might you want to have? Always necessary, I said, start saving for your future from the time you start working. Make sure that there is a good disability cover, a good hospital cover. And these days, it's very, very good to have a level of critical illness cover. If you're married with children, again, make sure there's sufficient medical cover, sufficient life cover. And as you get older, very important to give good attention to your retirement saving and covers for your family as well. Now, as I sometimes say that when God blesses us financially, let's not just raise our own standard of living, but also our standard of giving. So at Zamara, we have an initiative called Gift a Pension. I'd want to encourage all of you, just go to www.giftapension.co.ke. You can very easily open a retirement or a pension savings or just a pure savings account for anybody who depends on you. It could be your house help, it could be your driver, your security guard, or anybody that touches your life. It could be your spouse, it could be your children. Open a savings account for them. You can do it very easily and very, very securely. So, to summarize, investment planning is a process of meeting the goals of your life. It is a very, very important part of wealth creation. It is never too early to start planning for your financial well-being. Follow a step-by-step process and have a yearly check and a 3-yearly detailed check and review of your plans. So I want to leave you with a number of messages for the ladies in the audience. It's not the great temptations that ruin us. It's the little ones. The individual most accountable for our financial welfare is the one we see in the mirror today. Since I talk a lot about retirement, you can be young without money, but you cannot be old without it. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And getting the right advice, not falling prey. A lot of us in Africa fall prey to pyramid schemes and go for investments that at the end of the day we regret. So taking the right advice is very key. As I said earlier, in the time it takes to have a cup of coffee, you can secure someone's future. Please gift a pension if you can. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Be very happy to answer any questions. And then I believe I've stuck to my time of 30 minutes. So thank you, Anne, back to you. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conference.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Raichura. And even as you remind us to gift a pension, and we should be able to give what we can. We also want to thank you for the time for taking through us these 30 minutes and just sharing with us what we need to do to create wealth in Africa. I am just looking in at some of the questions before we go to the next panel. Someone asked, is it nice to have a life cover if I have debt? Maybe there's an issue around what is the best way to do it. If you're in debt, do you get out of debt, or should you start using that money to pay for a life cover? Maybe that's one question you can answer before we go to the next panel discussion. If you have time.
I think if you have debt, Anne, and this is a good question, you must always have life cover. Because if you have debt and you don't, something happens to you, who is going to pay that debt? Right? And especially if you're family, if you have home, you don't want to lose your home or, whatever little saving you might have, just because, you're no longer, the debt collector is going to come after your estate. So I always say, if you have debt, please take out life cover. And life cover is actually very, very cheap. There was another question, in terms of a pension plan, should I have an individual or should I have a corporate plan if I already am in a corporate plan? The important thing, Anne, is to save enough for your future, right? So, and I would say, yes, your own pension plan from your company is a good foundation, but the likelihood is it may not be enough. You need to supplement it through additional voluntary contributions, either through your company pension plan or taking out your own personal pension plan. And again, it's very, very easy to do.
All right, thank you for that. Don't forget about retirement. Make sure that you're doing what you need to do, be it corporate plan or your personal plan, to make sure you're saving for retirement. And also don't forget about your short-term investment goals. That's very important. I do have to say, Mr. Raichura, that when we're putting this conference together, most of the people who registered, about 1,200, and I see a few of them are continuing to stream in, most of them, 51.8%, were under 35 and 56.7% were women. So it looks like young women in Africa are the ones who are very interested in this particular conversation. So I think everybody needs to be having this conversation and doing what it takes to make sure that we are all creating wealth.